What's up everyone? Tim Newbold here, Director of Strategy with Skillfire. I'm so excited and pumped to be chatting with you all today about leading and lagging indicators. Honestly, it doesn't sound all that interesting, but it's one of the most common questions we get and something that people really struggle to wrap their brains around. So let me run you through all the different big ideas. The three key things we're going to talk about today are outputs, leading indicators, and lagging indicators. Now, an output is something that you can do. So maybe you go run a project with a team. Maybe you release a new feature into the market. Maybe you release some improvements to a product. Whatever it might be, those are the things you do. Those are your outputs. For a project team, it may be user stories. If you work on features, each user story represents a feature. Maybe you're working through more stories. That's the output. That's the stuff you do. It doesn't necessarily predict the outcome, though. What is the impact of doing something like that? We'd like to think that a new feature will result in happier customers and more purchases, but you don't really know until you put it out to market. So it's not enough of a leading indicator to be able to predict confidently that this is going to have an impact that we'd expect. What then is a lagging indicator? A lagging indicator is basically like your revision mirror. It's going to show you that something you've done in the past is having an effect. And by this point, it's basically been said and done. So a really lagging indicator would be something like your financial reports, right? As a company at the end of your year, if you've had a successful year, you've been driving your sales, doing all this really good stuff, your numbers are going to be great in your financial report. They're all going to be looking really good. Now, you can't go back and change the numbers. There's a few companies that maybe do that, but they probably shouldn't. Those numbers are set. There's nothing you can do to go back and change that. And this is where we also talk about that being either a lagging indicator or an end result, because you can't change it. It's done. So in between the output doing something and the future state being the end result, that thing that we basically look at and go, well, that was great or that wasn't so great, there's something called a leading indicator. And this is basically something for you that's like a predictor of the future. So how does it work? Well, a leading indicator is something that's going to predict a number's going to move in the future, and it's going to vary by different businesses, but there's some pretty core ideas that you know will drive that. So something like customer satisfaction. Often people talk about this being a lagging indicator. It's not. It's going to predict that you're going to have a return and long-standing customer. If your customers are satisfied, they're going to stick with you. Now, if you really bungle your product and everyone hates it, you're going to have a terrible customer satisfaction score. And you're not going to really find and see that in the numbers until they either leave your business, unsubscribe, whatever you do, that's when the numbers are going to hit you. So what can we do to actually predict these things? Well, you look at things like customer satisfaction and things like time to complete certain activities or task success rates. How likely is it that customers are going to be successful in completing a different task or a given task? So that's all good and well, and we're still talking a little bit hypothetical here. So let's get into some tangible examples. And in Melbourne, Australia, we actually really had some good examples for us recently. Now, this is something where we've worked with a lot of NGOs over the years, and I can imagine this key result's going to be a little bit of a tricky one for people, but stick with us. There's a lot of value behind it, and it shares a lot of insights, even though it does talk about something that's remarkably like the pandemic we're going through now. It's not our expectation that you would think this is a good quality OKR. It's definitely not. What it's giving you is an example objective, which probably could do with some work, and a number of key results that actually measure the success of that. So you wouldn't actually write this as a single OKR. It's more giving you some key result options that you might use and a few indicators of what's good and what's bad. Let's look at the first one. Now, this is something that's talking about an output, and this is a classic one that I see working with a lot of teams where they want to lift up a certain capability. A lot of HR teams work like this. They want to put 100 people through training, for example, and that's done. We've got 100 people through training. Fantastic. Another example of this might be a new features that you want to release, number of new features, might be number of signed contracts, whatever it might be. These are the kind of things that realistically are an output, and you have a lot of control over those kind of things. So they're not really a great measure for whether you're heading down the right path. And this is a classic example because during our pandemic that we've obviously had around the whole world, in Australia, our staff and medical professionals were getting taught on how to use protective equipment, PPE. One thing they found is that they would do the training and that was seemingly really successful. They would go away and we'd be all happy days. This is where the problem started. And realistically, we can see some examples of why this doesn't work. When they actually looked into how people were behaving after the training, and it was several months later, too late to actually be effective in making sure this training did its job, they observed the behavioral change. And if we jump down to the example here, what you'll notice is we've got something here which is an outcome leading indicator, which is observation and survey results show 80% increase in hand washing with soap. So of course, this OKR is all about saving lives in a village. Now, for them, in this case, they're looking at people being more hygienic with their hands and how they're washing their hands with soap. So that's a really good example of a behavioral change. And often we find that behavioral changes are your leading indicators. So if you're struggling to find a leading indicator for your business, look at the behavioral change indicators. So they might be usage stats, they might be how customers are using products, you might be able to observe them, but this is where the leading indicators come in. So in this case, when they actually observed and saw how these medical professionals were using their PPE, they found that they were not wearing it effectively. Now, in this case here, it's the same kind of thing. We want to see through observation that around 80% increase in hand washing. So that's the behavior observation. If this training had have been coupled with an immediate observation that people were effectively using the PPE equipment, then they would have been in a much better state. Unfortunately, they didn't do that. And so there was a number of outbreaks that were associated with improper use of this protective equipment. Really incredibly frustrating. So this is where we see the output is a very poor measure of the outcome. The training is really there to stop people getting sick because people know how to wear and use their PPE. Totally ineffective in this case, and they had to go back to the drawing board and uplift everyone on how to do this. Now, if we come back to our example here, again, saving lives in a village. Now, the other example, which is a lagging result, is unfortunately no more than so many people pass away. Now, that is such a terrible OKR example because, again, it's an end result. There's nothing we can do at that point to save those people. It's a very late indicator on health or anything like that for our people. So we've got to be very careful on using a metric like that. So again, the leading indicator here really is the best thing we can use. Now, there's another one which is still an indicator that isn't an end result, but this is where the lagging indicator comes in. And this is something, again, that we're using in most populations at the moment. It's the transmission rate with the pandemic. In this case, it's talking about how many people get sick. Now, that's a poor measure because, again, once people have gotten sick, it's far too late. There's nothing you can do about it at that point. You can do things to try and help them and make them get better, but there's already this transmission rate that's going on. That is a lagging indicator of how many people will be sick because we know that the numbers increase exponentially in most cases. The only way to control that is something that we actually luckily did really well in Australia, and that's where we went into a number of lockdowns. And again, everyone's got their own opinions about this, but the numbers don't lie. We basically see a fall in the number of infections, which is a really powerful kind of thing. Now, if we could somehow measure and track how many people were moving around in society, we would have seen a dramatic decrease, and that would have been our leading indicator that the number of people getting sick was going to reduce. The less people who are getting sick will cause the less number of people to pass away. So again, I know this is not a fun topic, but it's very timely and very relevant to the world that we live in today. Now, given this example, I actually want to take this another step deeper because these things are never as simple as they seem. Now, here's an example map of metrics and how they can impact throughout a business. So let's actually go through this example a little bit. And the trick here is thinking about how does this apply to your business? So on the left-hand side here, we can see outputs. This might be things like customer awareness. How many customers are familiar with our product? It might be advertising, all these kind of things. How are we getting out to market? That's the stuff we can do. We can show and pay for so many ads to be shown via a search engine. We can put so many ads on a billboard. These are all things that we can go and do. They're not key results. We don't want to show an ad to 50,000 people. That's not a good key result. But it's something that we can do and we have control over. So let's keep that in mind while we're going through this sort of journey. Other things here we can see product outputs and product impact, anything that's around the delivery throughput, speed that you can get through certain work. These are sort of things that are the outputs that you have control over. Don't use these as your key results. The reason why this is important though is you might eventually start to notice that certain activities in your business can have an influence on your leading indicators. And this is what we can see in the green and the blue here. So the green is a really far side leading indicator. If we can reduce the time it takes to complete a checkout, if we can increase the rate of success, how often people complete that checkout, then we can see that that improves things like customer satisfaction and a whole bunch of other metrics down the line. And this is where we see another thing to consider when it comes to leading and lagging indicators. Some leading indicators can be a leading indicator for another leading indicator. So we can see here as an example, time to completion is a leading indicator for the completion rate. The faster we can get through things, the higher the rate of completion. Now, we can also see the example in things which are still relatively leading indicators, but moving towards the lagging state. So as an example, and we're still definitely in leading territory here, let's stick with that one. So the completion rate, if we can increase the completion rate because it's faster and more successful, then that's going to give us increases in customer satisfaction. So all those metrics are a leading indicator for customer satisfaction. Customer satisfaction is a leading indicator for referrals, and we're starting to move down the chain a little bit here. But all these things are then feeding into our lagging indicators. We've got things like customer satisfaction is a predictor for engagement. Customer referrals and customer acquisitions are a leading indicator and predictor of the number of customers that we have, and so on and so forth. We can see how all these numbers affect each other. Now, this is a very oversimplified view, but you can think about this in your business, and particularly if you're working in a product team, what are the key numbers that I need to track, and how do I know that affects our bottom line? And as you can see on the far right side here, the ultimate end state here is your profit and loss statements. So if we do all the right things, if we're making the product faster and easy to use, if our customers are happier, then we know that they're referring more people, they're retaining with us longer, and we're probably going to get more acquisitions through good marketing. That's going to give us a larger customer base. More customers means more subscription dollars in the door. More subscription dollars means more revenue, which means a higher profit. So as we can see here, there's a whole bunch of little nuances and things to work through and be very aware of while you're going through this sort of journey with your metrics understanding. I call it data literacy, being very clear on how the numbers drive in your business. So how do we turn this into action then? There's a lot to unpack here. My simple advice is this: go back to your team and understand what are the key numbers that they can influence in the business that drive the bottom line. Think about them as leading and lagging indicators, because you'll have both these kind of things in your team. Anytime that you're approaching a project, think about how you can actually break that down to test out with your leading indicators and see, can you move a particular segment of the customer base perhaps? Maybe you want to just make things faster for people who have a single item checkout. Test it out, see how that goes. If that has a positive impact, try and speed it up for all customers. Maybe you want to do some trials with some customer bases that are of a certain age group. Whatever the case might be, you can use this to embed an experimental approach to product development and innovation in your business. Folks, that is a lot to unpack there. I hope it hasn't been too much for you. We've gone into the detail there. In the comments below, I'm going to leave a link to our free OKR training, which talks a little bit more about this. If you like that, there's also a paid version, which has a whole bunch more content and really gets into leading and lagging indicators in depth. But folks, I really hope you enjoyed this. If you want to hear more about product management and OKR and all these kind of things that we're exploring at the moment, hit the subscribe button, or at least consider it, because I'd love to be keeping you guys updated on what we're doing and what we're thinking. And if you do like the video, give us a thumbs up, drop us a comment. If you don't like it, go for it. Give us a thumbs down, tell us why. All of this helps us make this content better for you and more valuable for you. Folks, thank you so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful week or weekend, wherever you're at. Take care and peace out.